Hello, I'm Matty Dalrymple. I'm the Indy Author, and welcome to Mining the Movies with TropeTalk video series, where we discuss what writers can learn from the tropes used in movies and TV. And my co-host for these events is Jennifer Hilt, the author of the TROPE Thesaurus. Hey, Jennifer, how are you doing?
Good, good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, always a pleasure. And we are also joined by Jane Kelly. Hey, Jane.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Oh, always a pleasure. And these live Mining the Movie with Trope Talk events are open to patrons of the Indie Author and past podcast guests. And the next one is going to be on Sunday, February 11th, 2024 at 12:30 p.m. Eastern, when we will be discussing The Green Knight, a 2021 epic medieval fantasy adapted from the 14th century poem Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. And the film stars Dev Patel as Gawain, who sets out on a journey to test his courage and face the Green Knight. So if you're a patron, the link to join will be included in your weekly Patreon email. And if you're watching this on replay and you're not yet a patron and would like to join us, please head over to patreon.com/the Indie Author. And that's Indie with a Y, to explore membership options, which start at $1 per month. So in this installment of Mining the Movies with Trope Talk, we're going to be talking about Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. And here's a brief summary of the movie. In the bleak days of the Cold War, espionage veteran George Smiley is forced from semi-retirement to uncover a Soviet agent within MI6. In 1970s England, the head of MI6, Control, John Hurt, dispatches an agent to meet with a Hungarian general who knows the identity of a Soviet spy in the organization's ranks. And as we discuss Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, I'm going to ask our participants to consider two questions. What is something you liked about the movie that you would consider modeling in your own work? And what is something you didn't like about the movie that you would avoid modeling in your own work? And the tropes we are going to be looking at today are ticking time bomb, hidden identity, secrets, violence, and McGuffin. And just a warning, we're assuming that viewers and listeners have watched the movie, so there will be spoilers. So Jennifer, I always just like to sort of throw it open to you, and maybe you can give us a little entree into the discussion of tropes in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
Sure. I think one thing that I thought would be kind of good to talk about is the genre expectations for a spy movie or the spy genre, because it really kind of informs what kind of stories we're telling. And so, and there's a lot of things like, okay, I think readers, one thing I think is interesting to, or I've been thinking about lately, is interesting to think about, is those genre expectations are kind of like guideposts or things for the readers. So they're not like necessarily super aware of them, but they're drawn to them. So like, obviously this idea of secrets, you don't have a spy movie without secrets in it. And how that really just informs the whole movie. And you need to be aware of, with your genres, not just this one, but in general, like mystery or romance, like what does the reader expect and how does the story deliver on that? And this, because it's written by, John le Carré, who is like, at the time was considered like the spy novel master. He 100% understood like what people want and how to do that. And so that was something I wanted to just throw out there, is like really good to know what your genre, what your readers expect and how you can make sure that you're including that. So in a spy movie, what we're always going to want to know at the end is kind of like the whodunit of unmasking of the identity. So hidden identity is always like huge. And then within that secrets category, we have all these other tropes, like the hidden identity, mistaken identity, what other ones? What am I thinking of? Almost like the secret heir of, like, in terms of like who's going to be really running these other organizations. So kind of in a way, I think about it as like one, you can have like a big heading with tropes, and then it kind of trickles down into like subheadings or different smaller units that you can break up with. So that was just kind of a thing I wanted to throw out to think about that. And I guess the other thing with the spy genre that I have been thinking about, because as Maddie knows, I'm also very obsessed with slow horses, is that it can be easy to be swept away by the settings and kind of a sense of the plot. But it's really, when it's broken down, it's really a story of relationships. And you really see that in this, because despite all the pretty big cast of characters and a sweeping, going to different places, it really boils down to a pretty simple stories of these relationships between mostly men, which as we'll talk about, is a little bit of a bummer for me with this movie. It probably accurately reflected what the 1960s and 70s looked like, which was like a whole lot of men.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially in the spy ranks, I would think.
Yes, yes. I was complaining about that to my husband, like, oh yeah, the only women in this are like the honeypots or the secretaries,
Yeah.
who were kind of like put out to pasture.
Yeah.
So maybe it'd be kind of interesting just to like talk a little bit about the setting, because Maddie and I were talking about how dark it was, and how kind of they used tropes with that in terms of like setting up the safe houses and the different assignments and things like that. And I don't know if either of you guys, there was anything you guys had wanted to say or wanted to mention about settings or anything like that, or.
Well, it would be interesting to have, not here maybe, but this is an idea for you for a future book, Jen, is
Okay.
tropes of era settings. So 1970s,
Oh,
like a
yeah.
lot of this movie, I could have just watched with the sound off because looking at the sets was so much fun.
Yes.
And the things that they always, managed to get in there, like shag carpet and things like that,
Yes. Yes.
that you're looking for, and you're satisfied because, oh, now I recognize that I'm getting all the like signals of what the era is based on the
Right.
physical manifestation of how they're dressing the sets.
Yes. I totally agree. I have a secret desire to be a costume designer person, which, I really don't think is going to happen, but in my life, but I was just loving their outfits, and it was just so great to, and yeah, I was watching it. I was also had that thought the same thing, like, yeah, I could watch this without the sound off and just feel like, oh, I'm, over in Eastern Europe before like the wall came down, where they're like in Hungary and things like that. And then, especially I loved how the Benedict Cumberbatch character as Peter was kind of always dressed as like a bit of, he was working that like kind of playboy thing where he was, and then, of course, that him in opposition to Smiley, who was just, I just have to stop and say, it's like such an awesome idea to give that guy the name Smiley, when I don't think he like had any kind of facial expression, except that actor's fantastic with using his eyes.
Yeah.
So what a really like smart, fun thing LaCroix did with that.
What I thought was interesting, and I feel like maybe I saw something about this in trivia somewhere, is the glasses, the George Smiley glasses, that he's wearing one pair of glasses at the beginning. And then for no apparent reason that I can tell, he goes, like at the beginning, he goes to the eye doctor and he gets new glasses, and now he has the new glasses. And I didn't know if that was intentional or kind of
Yeah,
like a wink to something that went on
right.
behind the scenes.
Yeah, I don't know. That's really interesting. I wonder if it was kind of like, he's gonna need to be able to see things differently. Something
Yeah.
like that.
It
Yeah,
seemed like almost too
yeah,
much of a slap in the face. I think
right.
I read somewhere that Gary Oldman
Yes.
had felt very strongly about what glasses George Smiley should be wearing. And so
Mhm.
I thought, well, is it possible that like they had filmed some of the early scenes with the old glasses, and then he finally found the glasses he wanted and they just baked it in? That seemed so far-fetched for such a,
Yeah.
a well
Oh, but
planned out movie.
yeah, when I watched the little trivia things when we were watching it, they said he went to an eyeglass place in Pasadena and tried on literally hundreds of pairs of glasses. And the eyeglass place, I think, had as a place, has a lot of older glasses. It had a funny name, which I now sadly cannot remember. But I was like, "Ooh, I'd love to stop there sometime." Not and just like see if that place is still there, and like just to do that. So, but yeah, the costumes is kind of tropes of like letting you feel like you're really in that world. And I loved the darkness about it, because it seems like a lot of times in movies now, even when they show us previous times, everything is very bright, you know. Um, and I think it's just, and it's just easier to hook people, because when you're watching this, it's a dark movie, and if you're like, oh, this is too dark, I don't want to be bothered, But it was just kind of an interesting thing to watch, I guess, because there's so many, a lot of movies that are done, revisionist history ones now, like if you think of, I don't know history, but the ones of like the Bridgerton and all those Gilded Age and stuff, the colors of those are always a lot brighter than they used to be, even if the style is the same. So I appreciated that this was really felt like you were in that time.
The other thing I really liked setting wise was all those scenes where they were walking through the maze of the building and
Yeah,
taking the elevators and the stairs
yeah,
and going through a gate, and then they like
yes,
walk outside and then go through another gate and then they go inside, and I think that
yes,
the symbolism of there
yes,
again was almost like I don't think needs to be explained, but
right,
I
right.
thought it was more interesting and more understandable than the weird glasses situation.
Yeah, and I thought it was also interesting because you realized I was appreciating how much of that world was built on kind of human labor of all the various little of all the various people that you needed, like a coat guy and it's like now we're just so kind of with things being automated, and it was just kind of a reminder of how that world was. There were the different kind of levels of people, and then how it was just so much that structure. It was just interesting to think about that with now of, all our computer stuff and
Yeah.
all those kind of things. Um,
Another thing that happened, and then I'll get off these, why in the world did this happen, was is there such a thing as a fly trope? Because the whole fly, the fly in the car, I forget where the fly also showed up. And I thought,
oh, where did you see? I thought the one in the car was a bee because the guy was a beekeeper. That when he went to
oh,
up, he was a bee. But where did you see the other one?
I can't remember now, but there
Oh,
were two scenes where somebody was, I think that maybe when Smiley was in his apartment or something,
mhm.
he was brushing away a fly.
Oh,
Although maybe if it was in a scenario where he was in the vicinity of bees, that was it. Maybe I just missed the
mhm.
bee connection, but that
Hmm.
was another one that I kind of cocked my
I
eyebrow and said,
Yeah, I thought it was supposed to be, or at least I took it as, he's just so unflappable about everything.
yeah.
But yeah, it was a little like, interesting of, yeah, some of their kind of choices were interesting of how they choose to do stuff. Um, I guess one thing that I thought, another thing that was interesting about it was how they used time, because I'd watched it so long ago, I'd forgotten that so Purdue, the character who goes over to Hungary to kind of clean something up and then he gets shot, I'd forgotten that he actually wasn't in fact dead. When I watched it the second time, I was like, oh, so then when he was like a school teacher and living out of this little hut, his little trailer, I was like, what did I miss? Did I go to the bathroom, get something to drink? So it's kind of an interesting jump that I hadn't understood before, but then they like filled it in more slowly than I think you would do now because people don't have as much of a attention span. So it was great when they showed, oh, it was actually like, all these things that had happened to him and he wasn't really dead. But it was like that was an interesting change in terms of like, oh, that whole hidden identity trope. And then I didn't quite understand the whole thing with the schoolboy, what the kind of
Right.
importance that was, but I guess just to show
Well,
he's a loner.
yeah. I don't know if this was a trope so much, but sort of showing his more human side. I
Mhm.
mean, there weren't many places where you got to see the more human side of the spies.
Right.
Um, almost like the fun-loving side, I guess, him letting the kid drive his car around the field while all the other kids ran
Right.
after him.
Yes.
Eh, maybe there was some point to be made there that he still had this sort of childlike, fun-loving aspect even
Right.
after he had gone through the horrible things. But this was after he battered the owl or whatever it was. Yeah,
Right.
there's another weird one. Like there's a
Yes.
flying thing, there's the
Yes.
bee in the car, there's the owl flying out of the
Yeah.
fireplace
Yeah.
or whatever kind of bird that was.
Bird. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It was a great, I thought that was a really good startle of like, okay, this guy's like a school teacher and he's teaching these kids and he seems like he's so on the surface very normal. And then like in a snap, he like, this violent streak comes out of him that's like so barely contained. That was like an interesting, like, oh, so I guess he is still the same guy he used to be from before. He hasn't had a huge, personality shift. But yeah, it was clear, it was definitely got my attention and was not where I was thinking.
And I suppose the other thing that it only occurred to me now is that it could have been a foreshadowing. I realize that a trope that I've never thought of as a trope, but that I like is the mercy killing by one friend of another friend.
Oh, yes.
And that you could almost see the owl situation
yes.
as a precursor of that, that
Right.
the owl has obviously been injured
Yeah.
with its trip through the fireplace. And,
Right.
He does this brutal thing, but he's doing
Right.
it from a point of caring, not from a point of
Yes.
brutality.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I really enjoyed how little there was about the relationship between him and Colin Firth. What was his actual thing? He was Taylor, and his name in the movie was Bill Hayden. But those two men weren't on screen together very much, but like that picture of them that appeared, and that really great scene in the Christmas party where they made eye contact, and like the hope in that Jim Prideaux's face that he was going to come over, and then he just goes back to what his usual kind of cover is. And I just really liked how that was really well done, and that how he basically knew all along that he was the spy, as they said in the end. So
Yeah.
that was really good. Oh, one thing I thought that was really interesting in terms of like mystery, since Jane and I were talking about how much we like mystery so much, was, a lot of times in mystery, because misdirection is so important, but they show to kind of play fair, you should have all the players in the beginning. So really, one of the first characters that we meet is the Colin Firth character, but you never, he's presented in such a way as that you don't really think he's going to turn out to be the spy. But I liked at the end, or like this time that I watched it, like, oh, we see right away he's in our field of vision. He is really a possibility, but yet we don't take him seriously for a variety of reasons, which we can talk about. But then I just realized that, and then I liked how, obviously full circle, it comes around to the end with Mark, the Jim Prideaux character, shooting him, and then making eye contact again. But
Yeah. So, can you talk a little bit about that, about the idea of having all the suspects on the screen at the beginning, and what points people to or away from a certain character?
Right. Yeah. Well, I don't have, like, it's just something I'm still thinking about. So, but I liked how, they usually do, that's a common mystery thing, is where you have all the people in the beginning, and it's like, the butler did it idea is how I think about it. But I think the way that we don't take him seriously, as I was watching it, is he's always presented very, innocuously, like he always has his teacup, and he tends to be very like, oh, I'm not gonna take sides, or he was like, I'm not gonna be a party to this or that. And he comes across as both very rule oriented, and yet we see because he says like, oh, I'm not going to be a part of your like backroom shenanigans, but yet we also see this side of him where he's having multiple love affairs very indiscriminately, like seducing Smiley's wife, and he's just in general always kind of on the make for females, and then we learn later males too. So I think there's that element.
So let me ask a question about that, because was there an indication before the end that he was the person that Smiley had caught in his wife with at the Christmas party?
Was
like there was the scene where Smiley sees his wife outside with somebody, but you can't really see. I couldn't really see who the person was. And then, so I was wondering through the whole thing who the person was. And then, of course, at the end, for me, it was a reveal that it was the Colin Firth character. Were there indications before that confirmed that it was, in fact, the Colin Firth character?
Well, I think that scene where he, but it is later at the end too. Remember the telephone call, like he gets a call to the house and Smiley's
Oh
coming
yeah,
back.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So he's
And
putting
he's putting his shoes on.
under the table.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm trying to think if there was any, I'm trying to think if there were any other ones other than that scenes in it that it was Colin Firth. I thought that there was definitely like the Colin Firth character and the Benedict Cumberbatch remember they were talking about like the new blonde who had been hired. So there was this kind of sense of they're very playboy, I guess is an old word, but they were kind of always on the make. And so that kind of like in my mind was like, oh, okay, that's the kind of guys these are. So then it was like, then slowly revealed that that was not as it appeared.
Right.
But I don't know if there was another thing about Colin Firth besides with Smiley's wife besides that.
Yeah, no, well, I had forgotten about the scene where he's putting his shoes on. That was sufficient
Yeah, that was
to
good.
make it clear who it had been.
Right. And I thought it was also interesting that we never saw her face, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I liked how he said hardly like anything about her other than her name, but I felt like we learned a lot about their relationship when he went to see the woman who'd been fired.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I really liked that scene.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah.
I think and there was this kind of yeah, it was just a lot of information, like kind of, I don't know, there was a lot of there was a lot of information kind of shared there in a short amount of time with few words in terms of how she lived and their experiences and the pictures and stuff like that. And
Well, it was interesting too, because you couldn't have gotten a person or a venue or a personality more different from Smiley than that woman who had been fired from the service.
right.
She was living in some kind of like commune or something like that.
Yeah, I thought she was supposed to be kind of like a house mother kind of thing, was the sense I had, but maybe it was just a boarding house. But what I thought was interesting was I agreed that she seemed so different than him. But then when I thought about it more, it was like, but she was still like really living that job, or living, that was her identity, where she talked about like the nursery and like how she took it so seriously to be tracking down Rakyukov, the Russian mole guy, and had done all this very serious study, but she was brushed aside for taking her job really seriously and doing her assignment. And in a way, that's kind of how I think it was with Smiley in the beginning when he got fired when Control left. So it was like all those people that they let go that they were kind of worried about. But yeah, it was an interesting take of her and of a woman at the time, which I just thought was interesting because the movie was so, heavily men.
Yeah.
So,
I think that you had mentioned the nursery, and I think that's another interesting trope of spy movies, that there's this specialized lingo, and
yeah,
it reminds me of Slow Horses. So because there's a whole like slow house,
yep,
slow horses, how
yep, yes,
those kinds of scenarios where in any organization it's going to come up with their own more or less serious terminology.
right,
And that idea of the nursery, I thought
yeah,
was a
and the
good example of
circus.
that. The
And they
circus,
kept
yeah.
talking about the circus. Yeah, that was really interesting because I was like, no, I wasn't 100% sure. Like, so the circus was supposed to be like the MI5 building, I guess, and the kind of the structure. I wasn't sure if it was like a physical place until he kept sending Peter there. So I'm like, okay, yeah, it must be. Or if it was just kind of like the organization in general. So
Yeah, I
right.
always wonder, I should look this up, that the idea of the circus, I have always assumed that it was called that because it was on, like Piccadilly Circus. It was like in the
Oh,
circus
oh, I
of
didn't
like
know
as a
that.
location, but
Yeah,
then
yeah.
like expanding on
Yeah,
that name, because the whole idea of a circus and the
yeah.
the tricks and
Right, right. Juggling multiple
sleight of
things.
hand and all that works so
Yes,
well.
yes.
But it would be interesting if there's also kind of a geographical basis in the
Yeah,
same way that Slow House.
yeah,
Um, as
yes.
is the actual geographical place where that Slow Horses is based on.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't think about that with the Piccadilly Circus. I have that's really that would be a fun kind of thing to know now that you
Yeah.
mentioned it. Yeah. Um Trying to think what other things.
Well, I think that there's a trip. Watching this movie made me remember when I was very little, I would watch Mission Impossible, the early Mission
Mhm.
Impossible shows with my dad. And
Mhm.
I'm trying to guess, I don't know, in first or second grade or something like that. And
Mhm.
we would watch, and then there would be a commercial, and I would turn to my dad and say, "What?" And then my dad would have to explain to me everything that had happened between the
Uh,
last commercial and the commercial that we were in. And I had the same desire, like when I got to the end of this movie, I wanted to say, "What?"
yeah.
Because I don't even watch those movies with any expectation that I'm going to follow what the plot is. I'm kind of
Mhm.
watching it, I'm immersing myself in the experience, but
Right, right.
um, it's so convoluted. And I don't believe I've ever read the book, but
Mhm.
I fairly recently read The Spy Who Came in from the Cold.
Mhm.
And I've got to believe that they had to grossly simplify the plot of the book to fit
Mhm.
it into a movie. And yet it was still like, if somebody told me you have to now give a plot summary of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, I would be lost because I just, my mind doesn't work that way.
Mhm.
Um, like how is there a trope aspect of that? Like the trope of it's so complicated that only a few people are going to understand what's going on.
Well, I think, um, but I think it like at its core, it's a MacGuffin trope because of the hunt for the spy. So I think within that like big trope of the MacGuffin, you have like you have some other things hidden within it, like we were kind of talking about. So like the hidden identities and the misdirection, which are like really so crucial to how it, because it in one way it's like simple what their goal was. It was just to get there was a lot of sleight of hand things. So I think that's just part of the whole slash mystery thriller aspect of it. But I never felt like I didn't know. Yes, I wasn't sure how we were getting there, but I never was confused what the goal was. And I think that's kind of like a really big difference to make in terms of whether you keep your audience with you or not. Because then even if I'm not 100% sure what's going on, I'm still able to stick with it. Like another thing that I thought did a really good job of that was the TV series The Witcher. The first season was like when you watched it, you really weren't like, you were like, what? Like what? But they did such a good job of like, okay, they still had this goal, like save this, save this girl, or the various goals were like, okay, you could still see they were trying to pursue it, even if they were having a tough time getting there. And I think that's kind of the biggest important thing to remember when you're doing this kind of thing, is that you can throw a lot of complications in the way if we still have an idea of the direction we're going in. So because yeah, I agree. It's like, oh, you're trying to like, oh, the Hungarians and the this and that and the girl, um, and the Ricky, what was his the Tom Hardy character? Oh, Ricky Tarr. I thought he was a really good misdirection because it was just like, wait, we're back to him. What does he have to do with this?
Yes.
Um, and so I guess those are what I would say really the tropes are with that. Is just really it's a one big MacGuffin, but with a whole lot of misdirection thrown in there. One thing I didn't say at the beginning that I was realizing is super important with the ticking time bomb trope. Like that you really that it's so important with mystery and with thrillers to have that, because if this could have stretched on to infinity, you lose all the conflict. Like, okay, if we just have to figure out who this is, and we have all the time in the world, then it becomes a lot less urgent. But the way they kind of set it up with the politics of the sharing information with the Americans and finding out who this is before they have this whole big kerfuffle made it like, oh, okay, so there is a time limit on figuring this out. And I think that's like a really important thing to always figure out in your story and really set it up from the beginning. And they did that with meeting that guy with the toast in the beginning. Like he was like some kind of I don't know, maybe interior minister or something, who reported to the prime minister, where he's
Oh
having his
yeah.
toast saying, oh, you've had all these, yeah, the Hungarian thing was a mess, and we're like really happy with your work, but yet at the same time not. And so, oh, really, that was an interesting way of kind of like introducing what the complications and the time limits that that were going to be had. So I was like, oh yeah, that's an interesting way to like use politics as more than just a bickering thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Did you-
realized that the whole like if someone woke me up in the middle of the night and said, "Tell me the plot of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy," I probably would have on a first go round forgotten the
Yeah.
whole Tom Hardy thing
Yes.
because like in retrospect, the only way I can see that tying in is when they shoot Tom Hardy's girlfriend, which
Right.
seems very like arbitrary. Like she just
Right.
they bring her in, they say, "Do you know this woman?" He says no, and they shoot her.
Mhm.
Which I guess, I mean, I guess that's the point. Like
Mhm.
they made it not some big drawn out thing because they were trying to indicate, this is the value they place on life. They can kind of casually shoot this woman,
Right.
even though,
Yeah.
without the big buildup. But
Right. Right.
yeah, I thought that the Tom Hardy line was interesting because Tom Hardy was so different. He was kind of more like the woman who had been fired
Yes.
that you were talking about earlier, but he
Yeah.
seemed from a cultural point of view so different than the rest of the culture of the people who were in the soundproof booth when they got together.
Right.
Other learnings from the Tom Hardy plot line?
Yeah, I think I agree that he represented like a kind of different class, and he was pretty aware of that himself, which was interesting. He really didn't have like the whole kind of gentleman-y thing going on
Right.
that seemed like the other guys. So I thought that was really interesting about that. And I think he was a really good kind of red herring in terms of the storyline, because you had it confused you weren't this it was a way that you weren't able to overly focus on the main guys of Tinker Tailor, and because you had him muddying the waters. I thought it was interesting because Smiley then would have known this woman was dead when he was promising to get her back.
Yeah.
I understood later. And I also was kind of like, it was interesting to me that he was so that Ricky character was so kind of romantic about her when you realized what their lives were like on a regular basis, that seemed a little kind of out of character, but I don't
Well,
know.
the other thing that I thought was out of character with the movie is this whole scene where he's watching from across the street and conveniently all the curtains are open in the house so he can see like the woman and the
Yes.
man having sex in the bedroom,
Yes.
and then the wife
Yes.
coming to the front door and the two
Yes.
like guards who are sitting in the living room. And I thought,
Yes.
that's kind of like the Rear Window trope. But you can excuse it in Rear Window, but in this, it just in what else otherwise was kind of a gritty, seemingly realistically portrayed thing. I thought
Right.
there wasn't a better way they could have done that because it felt
Right.
so fakey and so
Yeah.
artificial.
Yeah. Yeah. And when it made, I guess, a little more sense when she was like, I know who you are. I want to talk to your boss. Right after she and Tom Hardy been hanging out together. And like he was saying, oh, they've been going out for the car ride and all that. And then she was like, then I was like, oh, okay. So she's known who he is all along, as opposed to just like kind of having this respite from her, abusive marriage kind of thing, which it seemed extremely unlikely that she would, when she just kind of opened the door and let him in, that part. So it was like, okay, then later, like, okay, she knew who he was kind of all along. But
But
yeah,
she could only know who he was, right? If she looked out the window, she saw this guy watching from across the road, right? Are you saying that's how she knew? Because how come nobody else
No.
noticed he was spying?
Well, I thought it was supposed to be that she knew so much about the MI5, like she knew about him like from before he showed up,
Okay.
because she was so tied into what was going on with Moscow and what they knew about what was happening.
Okay.
That was what I thought. So she was like, when she saw his, face, then it was like, okay, she was already aware that he was on his way over, I think.
Well, it does seem like if I were directing that scene or screenwriting it, I would have had Tom Hardy, watching at street level from across the street, and he sees the guy go into his apartment building with his girlfriend, accompanied by the goons, his goons, and then the wife showing up, and then a minute later she appears out of the apartment again. Now she's been beaten up or something like that.
Right,
That just
right.
seems like
Yeah.
it would have
Yeah.
achieved the same thing without this
Right.
sort of
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. That was interesting. I mean, there was her character was also interesting for somebody who didn't say a lot or do a lot. Didn't have a lot of screen time. That I thought she did a nice job of communicating the kind of Eastern European fatalism that I think was probably, at that time. And even when she was trotted out and, before they shot her, that she was just kind of like, before she got shot she wasn't as animated as I would have thought, or I would have been in that situation.
Yeah. And was the implication that there was some kind of connection between, what's his name? That is James Strong, whatever
Yeah.
that character,
Oh, yeah. The Jim Purdue, was there between him and who?
and the woman.
No, I don't think so. I don't think he did know her, but I think he probably was figuring out that she knew Colin Firth because he was really the mole. So my guess was that he hadn't personally interacted with her, but he kind of was piecing together the stuff was what I thought. But
Well, I think that we've hit most of the
Yeah.
tropes we talked about, but except for violence. So
Yeah.
let's not shortchange violence in the movie.
Right.
It does seem like that whole Tom Hardy part of that storyline was that there weren't as many opportunities in the rarefied world of the circus and London to show really gritty violence happening, and that was kind of one of the things about Hungary or wherever that was supposed to be taking place, that
Right.
terrible things could happen to people there. So how did you, as the trope thesaurus person, assess the use of violence as a trope in this movie?
Well, one thing that I thought was really interesting when I rewatched it was they made a big deal about Smiley getting a gun and him lying in wait for when the Colin Firth character was coming to the safe house. And I really thought it was interesting, like that he had taken his shoes off and he was like going to approach him like that. And so I just thought, like, to not make any sound while they were having this, that he and the Russian cultural attaché were having a meeting. So I just thought that was really interesting, where they showed him like basically taking a gun out of like a case that he was going to use. So it's not like he like carries one around all the time. And this was like a really big deal. So I thought that was really interesting, but you actually didn't see it being used in any way. It kind of then skipped ahead in time. And then the other, the couple other times was when Jim Purdue got shot in Hungary, and then in the end where he shoots the Colin Firth character. So I don't think there was like necessarily a lot of gun violence, which was really kind of nice to see in that. It wasn't like all this machine gun and things, but there was certainly lots of implied violence, which I think is always wonderfully scary. Like the guy who was like when Jim Purdue said, they worked me over for weeks or maybe months, those kind of things. Oh, and you saw the woman being carted off by boat, or she was going to be sequestered away by boat on a stretcher, and like God only knows what was going to happen to her. So like different ways that they kind of implied violence without having to see it. And I always appreciate that.
Well, there was the one scene where I didn't know what was going on, so I can't describe it. Can't describe what led up to it, but I think it was when one of the people are in that, like, the teletype room, and they go in and they find the guy who's been shot and his throat has been slit.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
I guess that's just indicating, like the overage. One wasn't enough. They decided to shoot him and split his throat.
Right. Yes.
That I think was sort of the most gruesome scene in terms of violence.
That was about the like the Russian Secret Service delivering a message. So I
Yeah.
remember that. Yeah. I forgot about that scene, but yes.
And I
Yeah.
guess there could be, especially if you put yourself in John le Carré's position writing that book whenever it was written, and he no doubt he was probably leaning into the whole like gentleman's rules versus thug rules.
Mhm.
You know, that what you saw on the among the British spies was more like people throwing insults at each other.
Yeah.
Whereas on the other side of the Iron Curtain, it was people being shot and strangled or whatever.
Yes. Oh
Uh,
yeah. And a great thing to support that was the woman breastfeeding.
yeah.
That they said at the table. Yeah. Like, right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the whole thing where it appeared that everybody in that scene except the one British agent was in on it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe not the woman who's breastfeeding, but you know, the waiter and the other
Right.
people, the employees of the
Yes.
restaurant, and the guy who was mopping the floor, and the woman who was inexplicably looking out of the shuttered window at them. She must have
Right.
like either been part of it, or he just thought she was part of it because he was nervous about the whole situation.
Mm-hmm.
There was kind of like a gruesome Keystone Cops aspect of that first scene
Mm-hmm.
with the, you know, the waiter sweating on the
Yes.
table. And
Yes. Right. Like things to make him nervous. And yet he's like, I think also, also to show like his resolve to follow through, this mission he's on, when there's like all these indications that stuff's not right,
yeah. And I
Mhm.
guess against that, like especially against they've shot a man, slit his throat, is at the end when that character shoots the Colin Firth character. And
Mhm.
that's like the cleanest gunshot of all time.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So it's almost like you know, it would have been too much to imply that Jim, right? Jim
Mhm.
was the
Mhm.
character who did the shooting,
Yep.
was going to do something that was going to physically damage the man he loved.
Right. Right. Yes. That was, I agree. Yeah. It was incredibly clean.
So let's think about the two questions.
Yeah.
The two questions of which are what is something that we like that we would want to model in our own work, and what is something that we didn't like that
Mhm.
we would want to avoid modeling in our own work. Jennifer, do you already have some ideas about this that you would like to share?
Yeah. I guess for me, it was a pretty awesome, well done. Like I can't really think of anything that I would have done to make it different, or that I wouldn't want to use myself. I would be really happy to write a spy novel that create a spy story like that. I guess the only thing that I personally would do, but it doesn't fall in with the times, is I like a greater variety of female characters. And so that would just kind of like be my personal thing of preferring something more like Slow Horses, set in a more contemporary setting versus, the historical setting, which they really tried to be true to the times. So I guess that would just, there's this kind of that thing to think about in terms of how much you want to be true to the time versus how much you want to have your cast be a certain way. But I can't really,
Yeah.
I think it was a really great story put together.
Yeah.
Otherwise.
Yeah, I think that the thing I liked and the thing I didn't like, I feel like this is a flavor of what I say after every single movie. But the thing that I didn't like was, and I'll use this example of the Rear Window scene where the Tom Hardy character is seeing everything play out conveniently in the three uncurtained rooms across the hall,
Right.
across the street, and that's fine in a scenario like Rear Window where it feels a little bit like it's not intended to be realistic. Like
Mhm.
in that movie, that scene feels of a piece with
Mhm.
the other scenes. Whereas in this
Right.
one, it just felt like lazy filmmaking that they couldn't think of a more subtle way of
Mhm.
portraying exactly the same thing happening
Right.
in a way that didn't involve people leaving their curtains open so everybody across the street could see what they were doing. Um, and then again, this is also something that I think I say every time. The thing that I really liked that I would model were those little moments like um when when the two characters were looking at each other in the Christmas
Yes.
party, that
Yes.
so much was conveyed in that look, in when their eyes met, when right before the shooter character shot the
Right.
Colin Firth character.
Yes.
You know, those kinds of trying to reproduce those kinds of subtle moments in
Mhm.
writing where you're communicating so much with just a few words
Mhm.
is definitely something that I would want to
Right.
recreate in my own work.
And it ties back, and it ultimately ties back to relationships, even though it's like this big spy hunt. But what
Yeah.
it boiled down to was like the relationship between these two guys. Oh, I did read in the trivia thing that it took 6 months to edit, which I thought was fascinating.
Oh,
Yeah.
did they describe like what is that a long time in movie terms, a short time in
I
movie
thought it
terms?
seemed like a really, to me, I thought it seemed like a long time, but I don't know how long a movie takes to, but I think because it was so well done, you had to really, be thinking of like, how much do people know at this point? And, it would be interesting to hear someone talk about that,
Mhm.
of how you decide to do something like a thriller edited, in terms of how much to know and leave out and stuff like that. So I just thought
Yeah.
it was,
No, very interesting.
yeah.
Well, Jennifer, thank you as always for walking us through that movie. Jane, also thank you for joining us. There's been a silent partner there on the screen, but always fun to have Jane here. Hey, Jane. Jane, was there
Yeah.
anything you wanted to add before we sign off in terms of what you would carry forward or not carry forward from the movie in your own work?
I'm fixated on the idea of the new glasses, which is where we started right back at the beginning.
Uh-huh.
And it just seems to me that almost any mystery you could write would be if somebody put on glasses because things are not as they seem and they're going to see things differently. So
Mhm.
that's something that I would really be interested in building in, not with too heavy a hand. And the
Right.
other thing is, I'm very relieved that you sometimes, Matty, don't get the plot because I just enjoy it and really don't ask me to explain it. I
Yeah.
have no idea what's going on, but I like it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I'm
Well,
with you.
I was the same way when I finished it last night. I said to my husband, "Oh, now I have to think about it," because I started thinking about it when I watched it, but then I got caught up in it, and then at the end I'm like, "Oh yeah, right. I need to think about what happened."
And that is what these sessions are for, because I
Yeah.
get so much more out of it if I have a day or two to think about it, and then I can talk about it with knowledgeable folks
Right.
like you guys. I find it to be a great learning experience.
Yeah, it's really fun because I always feel like, oh, there's all this stuff that I missed that I'm like, now I can have more stuff to think about.
Yeah, we have to go back and rewatch it now.
Exactly.
So thank you everybody for joining. Just to give another update on the next event will be on Sunday, February 11th, 2024 at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. If you're watching this video on replay and you're not yet a patron, you can join us when we will be talking about The Green Knight, an epic fantasy adventure based on the timeless Arthurian legend that tells the story of Sir Gawain, played by Dev Patel, King Arthur's reckless and headstrong nephew who embarks on a daring quest to confront the eponymous Green Knight. And so that will be in February. If you're not a member, if you're not a patron yet, please head over to the Indy Author, patreon.com/the Indy Author, and find out more about membership options. So Jen
And I
and
think
Jane.
it's oh, I was just gonna say, and I watched it on Amazon Prime. So
Okay.
I think that's where it was. And it's kind of odd, but I think it'll be really fun to talk about. So
All
just,
of these are fun. You always pick good movies, Jen.
oh, thank you.
Thank
Cool.
you both.
Okay.
Thank you. It was fun.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.